Hey everybody, and welcome back to another painting video. Today I am working on the dumpsters for Marvel Crisis Protocol. And as you can see, I've already finished one. And you may have actually seen photos of this around because I've been sharing photos of it around. And I'm actually really happy with the results here. And so I'm going to try and more or less duplicate what I did here on this one, although I may add something else to it as well. But let's just get right to it. For my main dumpster color, well, let's start. This has already been primed black, and I use, what do I use? Well, first I want to lighten this up a little bit. Okay, that's good. I use Stynylrez. This is Badger's primer. I buy it in large quantities because I use the hell out of it. So anyway, black is my base here. And then I move on to watercolors, green 5. I've had people asking me about watercolors. I'm going to include a link in the description to watercolors. You will not find these in your local hobby stores at all. The only way to get these is via mail order from Cyprus. I like them a lot, and I have other videos that talk about them specifically, so if you want to seek those out, do so. But otherwise, if you're going, well, I don't know, I've never seen those before, well, there's a reason. Anyway, there we go, got some paint going. And this paint is a bit translucent, or I should say it's not completely opaque, so it does require a few coats to get it down. I look at this as one of the benefits of the paint. There we go. And not necessarily as a problem, because a lot of times when I'm base coating, especially with something like this, I'm actually trying to impart shadows and highlights right from the get-go. So if you're working with a translucent paint, it means that you can slowly build up your color where you want it and where you want those highlights to be, and stay away from the areas where you want to see shadows or darker color. But to start with here, I'm just trying to get a good base. And as I said, this is going to take a few coats to get it fully covered. So I'm going to do that off camera, and I'll be right back. Okay, I got that color done. Looks pretty good. And now I'm just going to do this little logo plate, and I'm going to be using Watercolors One Coat Yellow. And this isn't my normal palette here, but I will show you why I have that out in a little bit. This is actually pretty easy to paint if you keep your brush at an angle, or on the same plane as the artwork. I mean, you can kind of almost, you know, dry brush it in there. It's not dry brushing, this is overbrushing. But if you need to go in and really hit an individual spot, just make sure you keep your brush at a good angle, and you don't have to worry about it getting into the recesses, because the inlay, or the recesses are actually quite thick, or deep, I should say. And so as long as you don't have too much paint on your brush, and you're coming at it at an angle, you're not going to mess up. So this is really easy. Yeah, I actually don't know. This is the logo of the in-comic company that does cleanup after the superheroes trash a city. I can't remember what it's called, but I also don't know. I don't know what the logo is supposed to look like, what color it isn't necessarily supposed to be. But the yellow looks good here as a contrast to the green. So I'm going with that. I'm going to finish that up. I'll be right back. Okay, one of the things I wanted to point out here at this point is that one of the nice things about painting something like this that you're going to weather heavily is that it is very forgiving for little mistakes. So like I got a little bit of yellow down here in the corner, but I'm like, whatever, that's fine. And I also apparently didn't clean my airbrush out as much as I should have before starting this, and so I was getting little speckles of my previous color in little parts. Whoop. There we go. And up here, and there's a couple, and some of it got sort of blended out with subsequent layers of paint. But again, I was like, well, you know, this whole thing is going to get really heavily weathered, so none of that is really going to matter. So that's what I did. I just left it, didn't care. So my next step here is I'm going to use XV88, which I'm almost out of, and actually have to get out of this bottle with a brush because it won't come out anymore. Now, I would not use this paint for pretty much any other purpose at this point because it's too sploogey. There it is. It's over here on this palette. So I've got a natural sponge, and I usually get big ones and then just tear off little chunks as I need them. And as you can see, this one's been used quite a bit. And then I will dampen it in my cleaning water and then try and get out as much of the moisture as possible. I don't want it really to thin the paint. I just want the moisture to make the sponge soft. Then I dab into the paint and then take a bunch off and then lightly dab it onto the piece that I'm weathering. And this will give the effect of rust. And I do 2 tones of rust. This is just the first. And I try to be careful to just lightly dab it on because I really want just the little sort of chip look and not big splotches. And as the paint gets transferred over and I start losing, as I need more and more pressure in order to get it on there, I just push a little harder, and you know it's going to change the nature of the chips over time, and that's all good. You want this to be random. You don't want it to look uniform. So you can see already here, it's very light. Even by dabbing heavier, I'm not getting much on there, but that's okay because that is perfectly valid. And I'm going to go over this a few times. And you can always move your sponge around too, because you might have a little bit of extra paint. Just always be careful that you don't discover that you have a big blob of paint on there. Okay, let's back off a little bit. You don't want to have a big blob of paint that you accidentally discover by putting it all over your piece. But that's really why you do the splotching here. You pick up the paint and then kind of spread it out on your sponge onto your palette. And I like to make sure I focus on corners, things that are going to actually get knocked around and dinged, exposing the metal and then rusting. But I kind of want to get it almost a little bit all over. But again, the corners and anything sticking out should be the focus. You know, if you're going to get anything, you got to get those parts. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of this off camera, not too much. I think I'm just about done here. But I do want to be able to bring it up close to my face and just get a better sense of it. And then we'll move on to the next color. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but one of the things this is doing right now is adding texture to the surface. I can feel it, and it's one of the reasons why I didn't want to have my sponge to be very wet, because I really want the paint to go on the thick side, even if it's just the little dots of paint. I want it to be a little thick and to add a little dimensionality to it so that you actually get a feeling of the rust aside from just the color. And the more layers that you put on, and if you can have that thickness in there, it'll really sell it. And I'll be honest, when I did this one, you can really see it there. I was not expecting that. It wasn't something I was going for. I had considered adding something to the base, like a texture paint, before painting this to do that, and I decided against it. But as it turns out, once I was finished, I got that effect anyway without trying. And so now I'm kind of trying to do it and hoping that it works out. But as long as I keep going in the direction I'm going, it should happen on its own. So my next color is Pro-Acryl Mahogany, and this is a nice dark red-brown. It's a good rust color. The Pro-Acryl paints are great anytime you want coverage. They tend to be very pigment dense, so you don't need a ton to get this going. I'm not even cleaning the sponge. I don't care if I still have a little bit of the previous color on there. So spreading that out on the sponge, making sure I don't go on the yellow, that wouldn't be good. And then doing this all over again, sort of just following along pretty much in the same way as I did the previous color. Because the idea is that, you know, you're still working with the areas that got knocked into and the paint chipped and and then the metal rusted. So we're just looking at different amounts of rust, different ages of rust. But in this case, you might want to focus even more intensely on those areas that would get the most abuse. You know, the corners, anything near the base. Because that'll have the oldest rust patterns. Oh, I already like how this looks. Okay, be right back. So at this point, you can kind of do whatever you want to do. I mean, even the weathering isn't really necessary. You could just paint this as you would any other normal thing. And I've seen plenty of nice looking dumpsters with little to no rust and no graffiti, but what the hell fun is that? so, so on this one, for example, I just kind of played with my airbrush freehand a little bit. Even little splotches of paint look realistic. This looks like something has been wiped out. Something was there and then crossed off, and then of course a meh face. All of those things sort of sell the scale of this. So I'm going to do a little bit more here, and I'm going to do something that's a little less freehand. And since I'm not an illustrator, I'm not an artist, I'm actually not that good with freehand. So I am just going to write lightly on the surface of this as a guide. Okay. And this is just going to be based on graffiti from my hometown when I was growing up. I'm sure it's still, you'll still, oh, and I'm already messing it up. I'm misspelling my hometown graffiti. That's all right. Okay, I just needed something as a guide there. And this is just white that I'm using. White is probably, you know, one of the more difficult colors to spray paint or spray airbrush spray paint. It's got some green mixed in. Whew. Apparently I had a little liquid on the outside. And it doesn't have to look good. It just sort of has to look real. You know, and if this is the kind of thing where you're good at this kind of stuff, well, that's fine too. But for me, I'm not. So I'm going to go for things that are just like, you know, look like a talentless hack with a spray can. had a little extra time. It doesn't really matter what you put on there. You ever look closely at a lot of graffiti and it's, you know, some of it's artistic and some of it is incomprehensible? Well, that's great. I mean, you know, that's okay. But we're not going to stop there. So as you can see, I added another layer of graffiti just done with a brush, and mainly to break up the one big piece. And I don't know if you ever looked at graffiti where it's had time to kind of build up a little. There's a lot of layers, and I could, you know, this is the kind of thing you can kind of keep going with if you want, but I didn't want to, at least not right now. But one of the things I forgot is that this dumpster actually has a number of built-in dents, and I like to take my dark rust color, in this case the mahogany, and just sort of drop it in with a brush into those dents to indicate that, you know, it took some significant damage to the paint when that happened, and the rust has really had time to kind of build up in that area. It also, you know, just provides an interesting contrast from the rest of the paint chips. Okay, I think that's good. The other thing I'm going to do on this one that I didn't do on the last one is I'm going to add some flyers that I printed up. These are just scans of punk rock flyers from like the 80s, and I just thought that would be cool. So I'm going to cut some of these out, and then I'll come back and we'll apply them. And there we go. I think it turned out pretty well. Goes good with the other one, but it definitely has its own direction. I did miss one thing though. Why don't I do it real quick? The top gets a quick dry brush of warm gray 5. I'm not big on the whole dry brushing thing in general, but you know, where it works, it works. And on something like this, this would almost look fine just with black, nothing else. But you do want to kind of pick out those details a little bit. There's some dings and dents in the top of this that you wouldn't see if you didn't do this. And you just need a light dry brush to pick out the edges. And like I said, those little details. And the dirtiness of a dry brush works really well with a dumpster. There you go. So now all I got to do is a clear coat over the whole thing, and then some pictures of the final results, and we can call it done. So that's going to do it for now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.